If you're looking to get faster and improve your performance, then you're going to want to tap into this video series on understanding and training speed. In this video series, we're going to tap into speed development for the power sport athletes. So we'll be discussing what speed is, the different kinds of speed, how to train for speed, and then what to look for when you're training speed. This video series is going to be broken up into 4 parts discussing acceleration, max velocity, multi-directional game speed, and then how to put it all together and create a holistic and complete speed training program. Now, all kinds of speed are important to train to give you the physical tools to excel at your respective sport. And learning how to sprint well and at a high level transfers to becoming a better and faster athlete. Now, besides that, sprinting is the best exercise that you can do to develop as an athlete. So from an output, speed, motor unit recruitment, and coordination standpoint, there's not a better bang for your buck exercise to use to improve. So it's important to continuously sprint and develop speed. So let's start by discussing what speed is. Speed is how much distance you can cover in a specified time. Now, there's many forms of speed, and they all need to be trained to build a complete athlete. So from a linear speed perspective, we have acceleration and max velocity. Now, linear speed needs to be trained when fresh with full recovery to achieve the highest outputs possible from it. Now, you can't get faster training speed when fatigued because you won't be recovered to move as fast as you can. Then from a multi-directional game speed perspective, we have deceleration, change of direction, agility, maneuverability, and tracking, which should be trained when fresh for outputs and skill development, but they also need to be trained under fatigue for conditioning to emulate what the game gives you. So let's kick off this first video by discussing acceleration in depth. Acceleration is the rate of change of velocity over time, so it's the building up of speed. Now, acceleration is defined by horizontal positioning, horizontal force, a gradual rise per stride, and it's very reliant on force-producing capabilities such as strength and power. Now, the big thing on acceleration in sport is how fast can you get to or close to max velocity to separate yourself from everybody else. Now, acceleration in power sports usually takes place in the range of 0 to 20 to 30 yards. But anytime you're building speed, you are accelerating. We're always building speed to get close to our max velocity. Now, acceleration dominates power-based sports like baseball, football, soccer, softball, lacrosse, and so many other sports. So training acceleration is probably the most important aspect of speed to train for because as power-based athletes, we live in that acceleration zone. Our sports are defined by quick bursts of acceleration. That first 1 to 2 steps is going to be what separates us from our opponent in the game. So let's dive a little bit deeper by discussing what physical qualities you need to thrive in acceleration and what we need to train to improve through acceleration. So as mentioned, acceleration is very reliant on force-biased qualities, such as strength and power. We spend more time on the ground early in acceleration to build speed. So we have more time to produce larger amounts of force early in acceleration to gain momentum. So talking about physical qualities, first, you need to be very strong. But more importantly, you need to be very strong relative to your body weight. Now, maximal strength, which is the maximum amount of force that you can exert, is important for creating strong, powerful steps of acceleration. But that relative strength, or your max strength divided by your body weight, allows you to be able to support your body weight when sprinting and get a high level of impulse. Now, the more relative strength that you have, the more horizontally oriented that you can be in acceleration, and the easier it is to move your body weight horizontally. But if you lack relative strength, you won't be able to drive horizontally as much because you'll have to be vertical to support your body weight. Now, on this topic of strength, core strength or proximal stiffness at the shoulder, torso, and hips is important as well because it sets the foundation to exert force on and maintain good posture. Now, acceleration is also very muscular driven because we spend more time on the ground. So we need to be able to concentrically produce force by recruiting as many motor units as possible. Now, it also isn't enough just to be strong and produce a lot of force. We need to be able to produce a lot of power as well. So although we spend more time on the ground early in acceleration, we still don't spend more than 0.3 of a second on the ground at most. So we have to be explosive, producing lots of force in very little time. We also have to have an efficient and excited nervous system to be able to coordinate, perform the skills needed in acceleration, and produce force at a very rapid rate, otherwise known as having a high rate of force development. Then lastly, it all starts at the ankle. So having strong, stiff ankles to avoid collapse on ground contact is super important to being efficient as we accelerate. So now that we understand the physical aspects of acceleration, now we can tap into the technical aspects of acceleration to become an efficient sprinter. Now, training acceleration with these technical aspects in mind allows us to get into these advantageous positions that we want to get in game, which help us run fast and efficiently. So if we can train there, we can play there. So being attentive to the technical aspects in training will translate to the game, the better we get at them. So first, in relation to posture and body position, we want to be horizontally oriented with our torso leaning forward as we accelerate, working in positive shin angles with strong and straight posture. Now, the angle that we project at and run at is going to be dependent on where the body is positioned to go. So If my head, torso, and shins are all pointed upward, I'm going to be in a position to go upward. I'm going to pop up early and shoot up and get vertical. But if my head is forward, my torso is forward, and my shins are positive, I'm going to be in a good position to move horizontally because my body's telling me I want to go there. It's pointing in that direction, and so that's where I'm going to go. Now, from a technical perspective, we want to first project horizontally, aiming at a 45-degree angle. Then from there, we want to maintain that low positive angle to shoot out and not up. So that's that sprinting low that people talk about in order to maintain that drive phase and accelerate well. But we don't want to lazily be low by just bending over at our torso, which is what we'd call a false positive angle. We want to shoot our hips out and actually project horizontally in a straight line. Now, getting too high too quick will stall us out early, but maintaining a low, strong position and gradually rising up with every stride will set us up for a strong, efficient acceleration phase. So we should be gradually rising with every stride, looking similar to how a jet would look like when it's taking off. It's going low to high, and it's a gradual rise. True verticality, realistically, shouldn't take place till about 20 to 30 yards, depending on the athlete's max speed and the athlete's build. Then, as we shoot out, we want to continuously move horizontally and limit braking forces by striking behind and then underneath our hip as we build speed. So we do that by moving our thighs in a scissor-like action out and back. So we want to punch the thigh out into triple flexion at the hip, knee, and ankle to create that space. And we want to rapidly switch the thigh back into triple extension, pushing through the ground and shoot the hips out more and more. So we're pushing back to shoot out. Think about winding the hammer to hit the nail behind the hip. So when you're accelerating, you want to wind the hammer for potential to get into triple flexion, and then strike the nail behind the hip with aggression of a pulse and get into triple extension. Now, a common error people have is reaching out or casting to gain ground. Now, by doing that reaching out and casting, we may be reaching further, but we're increasing the braking forces, spending way too much time on the ground because we really can't re-accelerate until we get our hip past our foot again. And then as a result, we apply less force into the ground and we're forcing verticality early. Now, on top of projecting horizontally, running low, and striking behind our hip, we also need to have lower heel recovery as we sprint, which means keeping the foot very close to the ground to be able to apply force at a high rate. You can't produce and apply force with your legs in the air. So keeping the foot close to the ground early in acceleration allows for a rapid thigh reversal and a consistent push-off. Then as we strike the ground, we want to strike the ground with the ball of our foot, not the heel and not the toes. And as we strike with the ball of our foot, we want to maintain that ankle stiffness to avoid collapse and rapidly bounce off the ground. And lastly, we need to have a strong, powerful arm swing with our arms staying close to the body while staying relaxed with the hands. So think about flowing your hands from your ear to your pocket. A strong, violent arm drive will set up powerful rotation at the T-spine to create pull across the body contralaterally as we sprint. So to put all of this together and to keep it simple, we want to shoot out in a straight line and continuously try to strike behind the hip. If you can strike behind the hip and push out, staying low to the ground, everything will come together in helping you sprint horizontally and very efficiently. So we know what physical qualities we need in acceleration and what to work on technique-wise. Now let's talk about how to train acceleration. So first, the best way to train speed always is with max effort sprints with full recovery. Now, sprinting with max effort is key, and we can drive intent on every rep by either timing our reps, recording them from the side, or competing with others. Now, to ensure full recovery between sprints, a good rule of thumb is about 1 minute of rest for every 10 yards sprinted. Now, let's talk about the distance of your sprints. Now, for acceleration-based sprints, we want to stay between that 5 to 30-yard mark. Shorter sprints that are going to be from 5 to 15 yards are going to bias that initial acceleration and are very strength biased. So you could do more reps of these very short sprints with a little bit less rest. Now, intermediate sprints from 10 to 30 yards tap into that transitional acceleration where we begin to get close to true verticality. So we're moving at higher speed, so it's becoming a little bit more fatigued. So that 1 minute of rest for every 10 yards sprinted is even more important there. Now, how much total yardage should you accumulate in a sprint workout? So you can get between 60 to 300 yards of total max effort acceleration sprints in your speed session. Now, how much total volume you do will largely be dependent on where you are in season and your training age. So if you're early in the off season, you can get more yardage in. But if you're in season, you may want to stay closer to that 60 to 120 yard range of acceleration speed work because you don't want to over fatigue yourself and overtrain and then get yourself fatigued for the season. So now, what type of sprints can you do? There's 4 main starts and sprints that you can use to train acceleration. Now, first, you can use static start sprints from a position of no movement. This allows for a consistent start that'll let you time your reps with consistency to drive intent and also to track progress, which is super important. So using something like a split stance sprint will allow you to have a consistent start. This will also bias more of these strength qualities to overcome inertia to create speed. Now, second, you can use variable dynamic starts to add movement and create positions that you want to be in. So for example, you can use a backwards hop to sprint to add some movement and variability, but also to force you in a positive body angle. Now, it's important to train acceleration as variable as possible from different positions. You accelerate in your sport from a million different positions and from a million different speeds. So you should train it from a lot of positions and from a lot of speeds to emulate the game. Now, number three, you can also use flies to tap into that transitional acceleration, which is that transition to verticality. This will get into higher speeds and acceleration. So a fly like a 10-yard fly with a 5-yard lead in, a 10-yard lead in, or a 10-yard fly with a 15-yard lead in, something that's going to stay within that 0 to 30-yard mark, but just focus on that transitional aspect is going to be something that you can use to train that transitional acceleration. Then lastly, and my favorite, you can do resistance sprints, such as sled sprints, hill sprints, parachute sprints, or any kind of sprint that requires any form of resistance. This will require you to apply more force in the ground in the sprint, and it'll also self-correct you to get into more horizontally oriented positions to push and move against the resistance. Now, you'll find a ton of different variations of sprints that you can pick and choose from in the exercise database, so make sure you check that out to give you some options to train acceleration. So as mentioned, I love resistance sprints, and they're the number one tool that you can use to improve your speed, especially acceleration between 0 to 25 to 30 yards. So we're going to dive into understanding the different types of resistance sprints. So something to note before we get into it, the more resistance that you have, the more force you're going to apply into the ground, but the less speed you're going to move with, and vice versa. So the less resistance, the less force you apply, although it's still greater than non-resistance, but the more speed that you'll have training with resistance. Now, the easiest way to train acceleration with no equipment at all is to find a hill and utilize the resistance from that. Hill sprints require more force application, and they're very muscular driven due to the longer ground contact times. Now, they also have less eccentric stress, so you can do more reps of these hill sprints and get more volume in without accumulating the fatigue and the eccentric stress of any other form of sprints. They also force you to get into more positive angles to match that hill. Another form of resistance that's very easy to set up and is very cheap is using manual resistance by means of a partner band resistance. So you need a partner for this. Then you can use a rope, a large band, or a harness, or anything else that can manually pull on to create resistance from another person. Now, a heavy partner pull that reduces your speed by 50% or greater will make it a very strength and force dominant movement, but it allows for more mindfulness at slower speeds to focus on your mechanics. Now, if you lose a lighter partner pull, reducing your speed by less than 50%, you'll get more of a power and speed stimulus while still applying lots of force and getting into good positions. And lastly, we can use sled or chain resisted sprints for resistance by pulling sleds and chains or by pushing sleds or prowlers. Now, by pushing the resistance, we limit the coordination demands, but it facilitates the positioning to create more postural control and that core rigidity. And we can also load sled push as the heaviest of the three options. Now, we can also pull the resistance, and this allows you to get that crossbody pull and coordination that you can't get from pushing the resistance. Now, with pulling, we have two options. We can pull from the waist, or we can pull with the shoulder harness. Now, pulling from the waist is the easier setup of the two, but you need to consciously create strong posture at the core to get it involved and create that rigidity. And pulling from the shoulder actually forces that core rigidity, and it forces postural control to get into that straight line movement horizontally. Now, with sled or chain resisted sprints, we can load this with however much weight we want. And you can determine the loading by your reduction in time, your reduction in speed. But for simplicity's sake, in this video, we're going to discuss loading based off of body weight, and we'll discuss loading by speed in another video. But let's talk about how to determine load with resisted sprints. Now, we can load them heavy, moderately, or light. Now, with heavy loads, we're talking loads greater than 70% of your body weight on the sled or prowler to either do sprints or marches with. Now, when using loads this heavy, we want to keep the distance between 5 to 20 yards. This will largely translate to that initial acceleration of 0 to 10 yards because of the strength required to move this heavy of loads. Now, moving loads this heavy requires the most force application into the ground and is very muscular dominant due to the longer ground contact times. But the speed and rate of force development is going to be a lot lower. But this allows for high consciousness and cognitive work to focus on your mechanics without adding speed to it. Now, if you're a weaker athlete who lacks strength and force producing capabilities, you may want to spend a lot of time doing these heavier loaded sprints and marches. And with moderate loads, we're talking about loading with weight between 33 to 66% of your body weight and doing sprints or bounds with that. Now, when using moderate loads, we want to keep the distance between 10 and 20 yards. This translates very well to both parts of acceleration, being initial and transitional acceleration. Now, using moderate loads is going to facilitate the greatest power output and still get you moving with a pretty high rate of force development at pretty moderate speeds and moderate ground contact times. Now, the majority of your resisted acceleration work is probably going to happen in this range. Then lastly, we can sprint with light loads, loading resistance with less than 20% of our body weight to do sprints with. Now, when using light loads, we can sprint from distances of 10 to 30 yards. This translates well to all phases of linear speed, with some initial acceleration work, some transitional acceleration work, and by allowing us to tap into or close to those max velocity mechanics. Now, lighter loaded sprints still allow for greater force application than bodyweight sprints, but it allows us to work at high speeds with a high rate of force development and shorter ground contact times. Now, because we're moving at higher speeds, we won't have the time to think about our mechanics too much while sprinting. We just want to take all the work and skills that we've worked on and carry it over to these light sprints and sprint fast, efficiently, and most importantly, very violent. So this is called autonomous work, when we're able to do quality work without thinking about it consciously. Now, if you're a very strong athlete who likes these speed-biased qualities in acceleration, you may want to spend a lot of time using these lighter loaded sprints. Now, you can determine load based off of what you need physically as an athlete, whether it be more force or more speed. Now, there's other ways to train or build on your acceleration abilities besides sprinting. Another way you can train acceleration either exclusively or before you do your max effort sprints are with drills. So doing speed drills allows you to build on your skills and technique to move efficiently. Now, some drills that you can do for acceleration are wall drills for posture and body position. You can do the A series and March series for top-down force generation and posture. And then you can do mindful sprints where you move at slower speeds to focus on your mechanics. Now, you want your drills to emulate the technical aspects of acceleration. I use drills as part of the warm-up to repetitively get technique work in every single day. You can also improve speed and acceleration with plyometrics. You can use extensive low-effort jumps to build on rhythm and ankle stiffness, so you can do like pogos and any other extensive jump. You can use horizontally oriented max effort jumps to maximize horizontal power development, so something like a broad jump. And then you can use reactive jumps and horizontal bounds to maximize power output with smaller ground contact times. Another way to indirectly improve an acceleration is to get very strong. So get into the weight room and get strong and increase those force-producing capabilities. You can also get stronger outside of the weight room by marching or sprinting against heavy sleds to increase that horizontal strength at the same positions as you accelerate in. Then lastly, increasing your max velocity ceiling to increase the potential for faster acceleration is another way that you can indirectly train that acceleration. But we'll discuss that more in video 2 when we talk about max velocity. So let's put it all together and talk about the structure of an acceleration day and how to make your own acceleration speed workout. A structure I like to use is a warm-up, followed by drills for skills, followed by a primer, and then finished off with max effort sprints. Now with the warm-up, I start off with a slow stretch, then go into a dynamic stretch, and then add some 3D movement in there to make sure that we're moving well and have good tissue quality. This should take about 5 to 10 minutes max, but it really shouldn't take more than 5 minutes. Next, with the drills, do drills that tie into acceleration mechanics and skills. So base them around horizontal positioning, thigh action, retraction, and other technical aspects of acceleration by using the A series, wall drills, hamster runs, building on stiffness, and anything else relating to acceleration. This should also take about 5 to 10 minutes max. It's basically your specific warm-up. Then after that, ramp the nervous system up with primers. So choose 1 to 2 intensive skips, jumps, or bounds to excite the nervous system, recruit motor units, and just feel explosive. At this point, you're primed and you're ready to go sprint. So get into your max effort sprints to tie all of these things together and build speed early in acceleration. A speed session can be done in as fast as 15 to 20 minutes, but you can take longer, like 45 to 60 minutes if you have that time and if it's really specific. So you can see an example of how this would look like in the sprint session from CSN lineman George Hasiotis' training. So he's working on a time crunch of about 20 minutes. So we start off with 5 warm-up movements to make sure that we're moving well. That's going to be our general warm-up. Then after that, we get into our specific warm-up with the use of drills. So we do ankle pops for rhythm and ankle stiffness. We do A skips, high knees, and A switches for technique work. And then we do wall switches for positioning and technique refining. After that, we get 1 max effort horizontal jump, which is going to be our quad broad jumps. And then we get 1 reactive horizontal bound. After that, we're really moving well, we're technically sound, and we're primed. So we take it onto our sprints. So we hit resisted sled sprints to improve horizontal force application and improve positioning. That's going to be more of our mindful work. Then we take that to our half kneeling sprints to overcome inertia and bias a very strong start. Then after all that's done, we finish it off with time split stance sprints to track our speed work every single week. So in total, we're really not hitting too much volume, but we're getting quality work in. So that's going to cap our discussion on acceleration. And now we're going to talk about max velocity in our next video.